Afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Hello, Shabbar. I'm good. Yeah, how are you?
I'm really well. Thank you very much. And looking forward to this week as we move our conversation on to how we relate to people that might have or do have slightly less money than we do. The previous week, we talked about our relationship with people that have more than us. And we wanted to look at the other side, which was when we might have more than others, and how do we show up in those sorts of relationships, and what does that bring up? So what will listeners get from today's conversation if they stick around?
Yeah, well, this is a complex one, so I may not be able to say exactly what they'll get. They'll certainly get awareness, consciousness, and a real mirror of their own patterns. The reason I can't be precise is, as we're going to see, I actually think in some ways there's more complexity and a wider range of stuff that comes up when we're talking about people or parts of the world that have less. Specifically, and I invite listeners to really think about this for themselves, and we'll talk about what it means. In some ways, sometimes we can feel strengthened, empowered, better about ourselves if we feel we have more. And in some ways, we can also feel very guilty or sort of in a state of tension, or that it's not good. So I think people today will get a real mirror of where they're at with that, and therefore what that might mean for them, both in terms of their own personal growth, and maybe if they do have more, what they might do with money to be helpful to others, but to do it freely and consciously rather than as a strange reaction. So where do we start?
Well, I mean, I can just give my own honest perspective on this, which is, sometimes if I'm looking at people that have slightly less or a lot less, and it's difficult to gauge because everyone presents a version of themselves, so it's very difficult to know, but you usually have an inkling, don't you, of what someone's sort of money situation is, or etc. I have two sort of sets of emotions, and one resides in the area of, I feel quite good, because if I'm looking at it on a ladder social scale, for example, it's like, I'm doing better, and that provides some sort of reassurance, and it gives me a shot in the arm, and also an element of feeling grateful at times that I've got more than them, and I'm doing okay, so it's reassuring. So that's the first one that I have. And then the second emotion that I have, and I think this is generally when maybe I look a bit further out of my immediate circle, and maybe I look at different countries or different demographics, etc. And then I just feel this element of, life's just really unfair, and I've got this privilege that other people don't. And that kind of sucks a little bit. So I don't know whether I was going to say normal in this, and I'd love, because I don't think people talk about this, and even me just voicing it just now, I do feel quite vulnerable in voicing.
Both those sides.
And I just wonder if people are going, and I'm pretty sure people do, because I would say
it's fairly, that's the kind
typical
of complexity that I mentioned. I'm going to put you a tiny bit on the spot, not too much. You said you feel a bit vulnerable or a bit uncomfortable. Yeah. Which of those two felt more vulnerable or more tricky to name?
Definitely the first part, which was, I've got a bit more than them. That's good.
Yeah, and I feel good about that.
I feel good about that. And it's more reassuring that, okay, I'm higher up on the ladder than they are. And that could come from sort of wanting to feel superior and feel more successful, etc., in this whole status game, that sometimes we get drawn into.
Well, we can dive in or why, but thank you for sharing that, because that's also interesting to notice. And I'd ask people listening, not just can they recognize both sides of what Shabbar said or their version of that, but which feels easier, because that will also tell you something. For you, it's less comfortable to kind of really maybe work with, name the feelings of a slight superiority or a slight kind of extra power, security. It's easier, more familiar for you, and maybe more comfortable to think about your feeling of wanting to help others, or even a slight guilt. So even that will tell you something about yourself. Different people will be different even with that. I would imagine in some cultures, if I went into investment banks, trading floors, where it's all about lots and lots of money, my guess is people would have no problem at all, or many of them saying, oh, yeah, if I get a bigger bonus than the guy on the next desk, I feel fantastic. It means I've won the year. It means I'm better. And they'd be able to own that feeling of it will puff them up, make them bigger, make them feel very happy. They may feel much less comfortable about thinking honestly about how they relate to people with less money. So, all right, immediately all these sides are in the room. Maybe I can offer a very simple framework for us to discuss and people to listen to. And then we'll dive into whichever bit seems most interesting. Yeah, so I think there's a few dimensions. The first is people who, you're right, you made a really good point that we don't even know how much money people have. And actually, there are a lot of people in the financial advice movement, you'll know, who make, I think, a very sensible point of saying, well, if people are actually saving and investing long term, and we're not on this podcast saying that's good or bad to do, but they would say it's good. If someone's investing, they may actually have a secondhand car, not very flashy holidays, live in a smaller house because they're taking their extra income and investing for the future. And other people may have a big house, flashy clothes, flashy holidays, but it'd be massively in debt. So even the idea that I know how much other people have, my peers, my friends, other people at school gates, even that's quite illusory, actually. And I'll give you the example, often on the money workshops I run, people will come and even their whole story about money as if they don't have any. And halfway through the workshop, they'll reveal that they inherited $500,000. Or I've worked with clients on money issues and they wanted to negotiate the rate very cautiously. And I went into that thinking this is a person who's doing okay, but struggling a bit. There's not a lot of money. And then find out they have £1 million trust fund, right? So even the idea we can compare in itself, we could do a whole podcast on that, actually.
It's such an illusion, right?
It's such an illusion. But let's assume we know. But I invite people listening just think, well, you don't know. So even your imagining is a projection and tell you lots about someone. But I think you can divide it into different ways. The first is positive or negative feelings. So you mentioned some. For some people, in some situations, they'll feel more, assured, powerful, bigger, inflated, reassured, secure. Oh, yeah, I'm doing all right. Ding, ding, ding. I'm doing all right. So good to capture those ones. And others, they might have so-called negative feelings. I feel guilty. I feel conflicted. I feel actually very sad for these people. I might maybe even catch that I've got more money. And then I realize, why do I worry so much all the time? Because I'm doing okay. So instead of feeling reassured, I feel a bit, gosh, I'm really worrying a lot. So we can capture both of those. And the other is whether we're comparing with people who more or less are in our circle, and then we might feel we've got a bit more, but they're still living in a whatever area and they've got a house and car. And so smaller comparisons, or maybe people in very, very different circumstances, which you mentioned in different parts of the world, where it's blindingly obvious that every part of our life we have much more material and financial wealth. So you could imagine all of those sort of a little matrix really of sort of positive feelings, negative feelings, people with just a little bit less than me and people in a very different situation. People could actually start to map those out. And there's probably lots we could say about all of them. Which is most interesting for you to dive into?
Well, I mean, they're all equally as interesting for me. And also I wanted to sort of flag up this idea of, how do we then relate, or how do we then act in relationship to these people? Because you can have the feeling, the positive or the negative, as I sort of described and you just laid out in that framework. But then it's like, how do I show up in relationship with that individual? And I think that's often the hardest part.
Yeah, that's a great point. In a way, this mini series we've done, so the last two in this episode, are very much about how we show up in relationship where there's a money difference. So the first one we did, the billionaires who feel a little bit disconnected or no one understands them. Then we were like, well, how do we relate to the billionaire or people with more? And now we're looking, how do we relate with people with less. What I want to say is that that's the key thing, right? It's not just about feeling. It's about what choices do I make, and how do I show up, and how do I relate. The link for me is, as long as I have those feelings and judgments and I'm not conscious of them, which is what we're doing here, that will kind of drive how I show up. So we talked in the last episode about I lose my power when I'm talking with someone with lots of money. That's because of a feeling I have and a judgment. But if I don't catch it, that changes my relationship. So it'd be the same here. It's like maybe I feel slightly smug and superior when I find out my friend's salary, something like this. Or I've just booked my 2-week holiday and they say, oh, we've only booked a week this year because times are hard. And I notice myself kind of feeling slightly puffed up by that, right? The point is, if I don't catch it, that is playing out in our relationship. There is something going on in our relationship where there's a power or a hierarchy or something. And so the way I can catch that would be by working with the feeling. Does that make sense when I say it that way?
Exactly that. And also there, just sort of in what I've observed and with clients, and even within sort of a community setting where you get a real insight into sort of dynamics, because it plays out, on a regular basis. It's this feeling that, if there is a sort of difference, an obvious difference, then it should be like, we should pick up the bill, or we should pay and take care of things. Within families as well, I think there is also this.
Not all families, though.
You're right. Yeah. I think maybe in certain cultures, and yes. I think, and I think our sort of East African, Indian culture, there is this expectation that if they're a family that are less well off than you step up to the plate and you provide and do your bit, kind of thing. And I think that plays into the dynamics where it's like one person has I think unconsciously a role which is more of a provider and a giver in that situation.
We talked about that. Was that 2 episodes ago, or was that even before that? You were talking about a client who was making lots and lots of money, but feeling a tremendous pressure to give back. And we talked about the difference between giving consciously and freely and giving under family or cultural obligation, which isn't really real,
which isn't really giving. So I think that also plays into the dynamic as well. So there's lots
it is a complex one. Maybe rather than go step by step, I can cut to the chase and talk about what could we do. So we'll do a little bit of mapping, and then maybe we won't visit everyone in detail. And then, because the answer about what you do is kind of the same. It doesn't matter which box you're in. So let me just summarize again. Let's say I'm with peers, family, people more or less in my culture, society, etc. And I compare and I feel I've got a little bit more than them. I might capture so-called positive feelings. I feel bigger, more powerful, more assured, more successful. Like I can actually feel good, right? So can I capture those and notice how they're playing out in the relationship? There's nothing wrong with feeling that. It's nice to feel that way. The problem is if I'm getting those feelings through this sort of money projection and money conversation, whether I realize it or not, the flip side is they become slightly less. I might not mean to, I might love them very much, but it's like, well, if I've got the bigger number, because I'm making the mistake of tangling up a feeling which I want to feel successful. I want to feel safe. I want to feel like I'm doing a good job. I want to feel like I'm a wise person who's made good choices. Nothing wrong with that. But if I make the mistake of thinking some number is what shows me that, then the only way I get to do that is I judge their number as, well, they're less wise and not successful and less protected. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't get one without the other, because that's entanglement.
It just comes back to the same old thing that you're tying something up in the number, and it's not in the bloody number.
No.
The
It's
bigger
not in
number
the
doesn't
bloody...
make you better or more successful or
No,
wiser
exactly.
or anything.
So that's the step we're going to take for everybody. But let's give a few examples of how that might show. But no, and the thing about in relationship, because the whole podcast is saying it's not about the bloody number, right? We could have called the podcast "It's Not About the Bloody Number." We might get more audience if we did. I don't know. But yeah, we've explored that idea a lot. The quality, whether it's a quality that we think we want or a quality we wish we didn't have to experience, isn't in the number. What makes it even more complex is when it's relational, there's two steps. Firstly, anytime I think the number means this for me, then their number automatically in my means kind of like something different if it's a different number for them. So if they have lower, in my mind, they're less successful, less high status. And that's a bit of a shitty way to treat a friend. Potentially, we're going to come on to why, because it might be true, but it might not be at all true. I was talking to you, we were talking about nurses, right? Before, you could be an incredibly successful nurse and be assured, competent, successful, wonderful, more useful than most jobs, and still have less money than someone you meet at a party, right? So there's all sorts of reasons why the number doesn't mean what you think. And what a shame if someone else's psychology gets you to feel pushed down or, changes that relationship that way. But then the other thing, remember, is it's all illusory anyway, because we don't actually know how much money this person's got. So it gets very, very confused. Okay, so we could have that, or we could have so-called negative feelings. So I've got more money and I feel guilty or unworthy or greedy or whatever. And we've talked about that on the podcast. The number doesn't mean what you think.
Yeah, let me just interrupt and reference episode 19. We talked about being rich or poor and diving into privilege when we observe having more and how we relate, and that was a really good episode to go back and listen to when looking at poverty in the world.
And in that episode, and we'll come on to it again today, the point, or one key point there, is we talked about financial poverty and poverty that's not to do with money. So we talked about people who might have lots of money but are poor in relationships or in spirit or spirituality, or their mental health isn't so good, or so there's different sorts of poverty. Okay, so we've got a bit of kind of matrix. Whether I'm feeling terribly guilty about the starving people of the world, or slightly smug because I've got a bigger car than my neighbour, or slightly pressured because I've got more money than my family back home and I should give more money to them, or whatever it is, we're seeing there's a real complexity. So the one thread, and you named it before, the one thread in the complexity is the number don't mean what we think the number means. So what an amazing dance we do. And I'd invite people to think about this. I turn up at the school gates and I see some other parent's car, and I can be off on a story, and I can make me feel shit about myself or good about myself, or have some whole story about them, or wow, like all that stuff I just made up. Or I can hear about someone's holiday, or I can hear this family went skiing, and suddenly I go down this rabbit hole about, I don't know, I'm a terrible parent, or if only I'd studied harder at university, or I don't think I'm just being fanciful here. Those things can happen. We can hear a single line about what someone did at a half term or a car or anything, and we're off on some crazy story rabbit hole.
Yeah. And you don't know whether the bailiffs are actually knocking on their door, and that's happens,
But even if they are, it doesn't matter, because you're too busy beating yourself up. You can't help them because you're feeling this, that, or the other. So I think you can really see how much. I've just been on a week's meditation retreat. I was telling you, and there's nothing like meditating, in silence for a week, to help you see the power of your own mind in creating stories, really, and how compelling and real it seems. And then you realize, the Buddhists talk about emptiness. Well, we're talking about the emptiness of your money stories, or the emptiness of the numbers. And it's very good in this. I think this is a good example to do it, to notice that some feeling of having a bit more or a lot more, and you're off on some story about yourself, your past, your future, them, society. It's kind of strange, really. So I would say the first step for people, and maybe that's a glimpse, is to realize whatever your story, it's a made up story. Whether you feel better or worse, or stronger or weaker, or guilty or grateful, certainly to the extent that it's sort of running in your mind and you're off down whatever rabbit hole, see if you can catch the story and have the mantra, the slogan, it's not in the money. The number doesn't mean what you think. That would be a first step. Let me stop there and see what that brings up for you.
And it feels like, I mean, we've been having these conversations on the podcast for a year or so now, and I've known you for, a couple of years before that, since I came onto a workshop. And it's so obvious when it's, discussed and we talk about it. It's not in the bloody number, but it's almost like a default disposition of the human being to create that story, because are we constantly just looking for making meaning and sense of the world and our position, etc. And the only thing, or one of the things that it's so easy to latch onto is the number, because for us, I don't know whether it just gives the mind something to digest on, but it feels like that is just the default. And I guess this is the lifelong work, right? Is to try and decouple, and you just get sort of slightly better at catching yourself. And I find myself getting better at spotting it and just, it's not in the number, and we don't know what's going on, and therefore let's stop creating a narrative that could be totally untrue and taking down a path which is, not very healthy. Yeah. And it's just so mightily difficult to keep reining that in. And I think that, for anyone listening, it just comes down to doing it over and over again. And it's almost like you just put in the reps and you just get slightly better at it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, actually, it's very analogous to meditation. You're actually asking some very profound questions. So let me try and respond briefly to different questions, and then we'll come back to specifically this one of comparing with people with less. And, maybe we have a mini series on some of the more profound questions around culture and numbers and the illusory nature of things. The first thing, you're right, it's so powerful, right? It's so powerful, this habit to grasp what I call a money number and have it mean instantly, without us realizing we're doing it, have it mean whatever story it means. And I love what you say. It's reps, it's listening to the podcast, come on a money workshop. You can do this work, but when you do the work, as you know, and I know, I've been doing it 20 years, it doesn't instantly all change, but you do start to become much more conscious of what's happening. And that's really good. Is it a human need? Is it numbers? I would say both. We've talked about this a bit before. Humans do get confused, and we do make up stories, and people have written about the human need to make meaning. And again, Buddhist meditators will talk about emptiness and how much we create through the mind, and how reality is manomaya, mind made. So it's not just numbers. We do it onto all sorts of things. And it does seem in this society, particularly at this time, there is something very, very highly charged and powerful about this thing we've made up called money. And so we put it onto money. So the answer is we don't just do it onto money, we do it onto everything. But money, I suppose there's two things. One, we live in a very numbers-driven, financialized, materialistic society. There's a whole reason why. We get into that sometime. So a lot goes on to money. So I think money is more highly charged. For example, other cultures, you go into indigenous cultures, shamanic cultures, spiritual cultures, you all know this, other periods of history. Yeah, humans were still confused and still wrapped up with numbers, but less. They just recognized that other things were central or more central. We're particularly hypnotized by materialism, the power of numbers through the scientific revolution and through the kind of financialization, economicification, if that's a word, right? The good news of that, because that could be very depressing, the good news is it means, and this is like your third point, anyone who wants to can use all the stuff that comes up around money as a really amazing path for their own growth and freedom, and in turn for helping society. Because so much is wrapped up with money, you don't have to go up a Himalayan mountain and meditate for 3 months. You can. You don't have to do whatever practices, etc. You can. But if you're interested in the world and yourself in relation to different people with more and less and all of this stuff, look at how you do money. It will mirror back so much to you. So coming to your, I think it was your final point, yes, we've got to do the reps. And yes, noticing how much we tie up into money and that we don't need to and that it's all illusory, that's all great. That's all what we call the detective work. And there's a couple of other steps I'm going to mention. And then don't forget, we've talked about it on the podcast before, even beyond the noticing, there's this kind of third stage where we go, well, if me having more money than my neighbour makes me feel bigger and strong, then actually it's telling me that somehow in my day-to-day life, I'm lacking a feeling of strength. I feel a little bit diminished and weak. That's interesting. So then money becomes my ally, right? Whether I have money or not, capturing this story is like, wow, it's almost like money is now the guru saying to me, hey, Tim, look what you just did there at the school gates when you saw this guy's shitty car. You felt better about yourself. That's telling you about some part of yourself that you need to look at and be more in touch with. And you can. And it's nothing to do with your car.
Yeah. I mean,
that's a possibility.
That's such an eye-opener when you can have that gift. And that is a real gift to be able to notice that and say, wow, okay, there's something to learn here. Because if you're pinning your strength and all of the good qualities onto a number or a status, etc., that is a real eye opener. So where do we go from having maybe done some investigating and noticing? What's the next step that follows on from that?
Yeah. So let me say one more thing about the noticing, and then I'll answer where we go, which is this third stage, which we've called reclamation, and I can maybe give some kind of simple examples. And again, there's past episodes. So as well as in general noticing what comes up for you and realizing you actually don't know how much money this person has and realizing it's not in the number, it's all made up. Another really good way to retrain ourselves, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, is actively then notice counterexamples, right? So let's say I see the guy at the school gates and he's got a whatever. It's hard to have a worse car than mine. We talked about my car on the podcast, but let's say he does. Oh, I wonder what people project onto my car. That's interesting. Let's say, yeah. And so I feel this, that, or the other. I feel strong, successful, etc. I'm implicitly making him a little bit weaker in my mind or less successful. Notice the counter example. It doesn't have to be specific to that person, although it could be. But I notice I'm assuming bigger car means bigger person, more successful, more accomplished. Let me notice counterexamples. Let me notice people who drive tiny cars because they are pursuing their life's passion and they don't have much money at the moment, maybe, but every day they wake up, they feel great, they feel vital, they're creative, they're really going for it, they sparkle. Wow. Pretty quickly, I realized not just that the car doesn't mean what I think it means, but it could even mean the opposite. It could mean the opposite. I might look for a counterexample and see someone who's bought another big shiny car and actually consider the number of people who have big shiny cars because they're miserable at work, they're earning loads of money, they've got golden handcuffs, they don't really know what their life's about, they don't feel great about their lives, but at least they get another shiny car every year, right? Now, I'm not judging people who have shiny cars or not. If you love a shiny car, then I'm happy for you, really. But I just look for counterexamples. I look for things that might be the opposite. And then I quickly can start to see that, well, this person may have loads of money. It might even be a person I make up. But I have loads of money, but then they're really unhappy with what they do, or they're not aligned with their passion, or this person has chosen to be dedicated to something where society doesn't bring much money, but they feel powerful, they feel big in their role, they're in their right place. So these are the counterexamples. And we can find many. And we talked about that on episode 19 about poverty. So even when I feel terribly guilty about all the people with less than me, the guilt isn't helpful. That doesn't necessarily free up. If I can take a more cool analysis and say, well, I definitely have more money, and the money doesn't mean what I think. So maybe I could consciously put money in places where it could help those people with money. But let me not push them down and assume just because they don't have money, they don't have vitality, spirit, community, relationships. They may have many things I don't have. So I can start to see much more clearly what might be going on. And then if I do have more money and I'm not attached to it, then I could choose freely to give it, allocate it, help people. I'll pause there, but I also want to say about the reclamation, because you asked about that.
No, and having that awareness and looking at counter examples, it does something to help you see that person as a human being, which I think when you start comparing people and your relationship with them based on a number, you've kind of objectified them, and then it's very difficult to be in true relationship with that person. And just as an anecdote, I was helping feeding the hungry or the poor in central London. Organisation was giving out food parcels to people that were needing sort of food banks, and most of the people that turned up were homeless. And I was having a conversation with someone, and I was previously caught up with the fact that, okay, well, if you're homeless, or obviously something's not quite right, you've not made a success of yourself, you've dropped out, this, that, the other, and whatever. And I was talking to this one chap who was there, and like when he told me his backstory, he was like an engineer, like university, had a great job. And I was like, how the hell did you end up homeless on the streets of London, now needing to come to a food bank?
Did you ask him?
And so we got into this conversation, and he had a relationship with his wife that went really bad. He had to leave the house, didn't go into the sort of the ins and outs, but basically then didn't have a home, was sort of couch surfing for a while, ended up turning to alcohol because of the whole situation. And before you knew it, this had sort of escalated, and now the chap's been homeless on the streets. And I was amazed at the fact that this was someone, and I would not have put that person down as academically bright or successful, etc. But it was amazing to notice that. And for me, that was a real shift in my thinking, that you just don't know.
You don't know. You absolutely don't know. I think that's a great example. Again, it's very profound what you say. You also don't know from a certain point of view what that person's path is about, and what's the inner meaning of that path for them. I mean, they're probably more hungry than you and more cold, and right now having a very difficult time in a particular way. And again, we don't need to be stupid about that. If we can help, we help. But we don't need to feel smug. You have no idea what I would say as a spiritual person and a psychologist. Everyone's journey has an inner meaning. There's things we're here to learn. There's obstacles we're here to face. There's wisdom we're here to gain. I'm guessing that man will have qualities just because of what's happened to him, and a certain sort of wisdom that you might go to the mosque every day for 20 years and he might know something. I don't know what it is. About human empathy or compassion or understanding or tolerance. I don't know. And I'm not romanticizing it, because I'm sure he has a really shit time some of the time, right? It's just exactly what you say. When you strip the numbers, when you're not projecting onto a number, you see a human being, and then you start to, we are all so much more mysterious than we realize. And the number is really, as well as illusory, it's just a way of narrowing down the kind of mystery, really, of a human life.
I know we're drawing towards the end, but can you just allude to the point which you said, if I'm feeling sort of guilty, like that doesn't serve anyone, and I'm not able to then sort of act in a way that serves maybe the underprivileged or the poor, because just in case someone hasn't listened to a previous, and just briefly touch on why is that not helping the situation?
Well, because guilt's a feeling, and choosing to help someone is an action. And we may have all sorts of funny notions like, it's good to feel guilty because then I help more. or I should feel guilty because then I won't feel grateful. But if you just examine it, it's complete bullshit. It just doesn't make any sense. I can choose to be generous and free with money, with my time, with my energy. I don't need to feel shitty and guilty in order to do it. That's bound up with a whole load of, I would say, kind of Christian Puritan ideas, right? There doesn't seem to be evidence, as far as I can see, from humanity that if we're actually happy, appreciative, grateful, and joyful, we become less kind and helpful to the world.
Yeah.
I don't think it's true. I think it's the opposite, that generally, if I can be more in touch with my own sense of goodness, and if I have got more to actually feel appreciation and gratitude, I can still have compassion. That's not guilt. Compassion is kind of the capacity to be with someone in their suffering, not turn away, and to act in response. I just don't need to feel shitty about myself in order to do it. I just think it's an illusion. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
But it's a great question, because it's a very powerful, pernicious notion. I think it's tied up with all sorts of things, personally and culturally.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to feel bad about, in fact, I'd say the opposite. When I feel bad about myself, even though ideologically I think that might make me more righteous or whatever, I think it actually prevents us helping. And if I can feel grateful for my life and all that's there, I think I can see things more clearly. I don't need to feel smug, but I also don't need to feel terrible.
And the guilt can bring potentially resentment, and then you're sort of giving, because of feeling of obligation to try and remove the guilt.
Yeah. And I also think it pushes down the other, because I can feel terribly guilty about these starving people. And, I should feel compassion for people who are starving. And if I can mobilize time, energy, money to try and help. But when I feel guilty, it's kind of taking away more from them, I think. We talked about this again in episode 19. So let me do a really quick step with the reclamation.
Yep.
Again, we have talked about this. The simple step is not just to do the counterexample, see it's illusory, and see what am I tying up, whether it's my success and accomplishment or my greed and guilt, etc. But when I find something, I need to see I am already whatever that is, and it's not to do with money. And that's what Peter Koenig, who founded this work called the reclamation step. So let's say I feel good because I have a bigger holiday and I get to go skiing and a bigger car, and I realize I feel successful and safe. Then I realize, well, that's not in the money. That's telling me a quality I'm lacking at the moment, and I've tied up with the numbers. So I can say something like, I am successful with and without money, or with and without more money, or with and without 3 holidays a year. I start to actually experience those qualities in me, not in the objects. And the same thing, if I notice I have more money than somebody, like a lot more, and I feel bad, and I might think, well, I'm privileged and greedy, I need to see that that's true. And that on a deep level, because it's true, it's okay, right? So rather than, I feel guilty because I am privileged, but I shouldn't be. And I am greedy because I have more, but I shouldn't. Then I'm in war with myself, and I'm so much in war with myself, I can't help anyone. It's actually much clearer to go, I am privileged and guilty, and it's okay, right? Like existentially, it's okay because it's part of reality. If I can really feel that, then I could actually be more likely to help or offer time and resources. As long as I'm feeling guilty and intention, I'm much more bound up with myself. Yeah, so that's, I know you know this, but that's a summary of what we call the reclamation process. If people are listening and that seems really weird, or this is the first podcast you've listened to, listen to some previous ones and send us an email, and we'll get more into it, because this process is not, it's not a slogan, it's not an affirmation, and it does seem a bit weird when you first do it. So don't worry if it sounds a bit confusing if you're listening. Does that sound okay, Shabbar?
Yeah, that and people should try these statements and just see what happens.
What I would say is try them, but listen to a few where we talk about it. And if you're in any doubt, please email us, because it is quite powerful.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying don't try them, but there's a certain way to get them right and have the right phrasing. And so what I wouldn't want is people to do these kind of in not quite the right way and not be kind and gentle with themselves. And so if in doubt, please play very lightly and email us if you've got any questions, because I kind of feel they are quite powerful, aren't they?
Yeah.
They might not sound like it the way we talk about them, but they are actually quite powerful. Yeah.
All right, Tim. I think we'll wrap up for today.
Thanks, Shabbar.
See you next time.
See ya. Bye. Oh.